Nick, how are you?
Hey, good, Bill. How are you?
Good, good. First time I've seen you in person in this isn't really in person, but in the last, what, 4 or 5 months?
Yeah, man. I think you're the first person I've had in my studio in a couple weeks. It's been quite a while. So
I know, it's a crazy time.
yeah,
Um, you were down standing with your family, with your dad?
uh,
For a while?
yeah. I grew up in Newport Beach, as you know, and so I was kind of going down there and spending time with him. He's 72, I think, right in that danger zone for this
Yeah.
COVID. So I was there kind of like, making sure he stayed inside and washed his hands and was making him dinner and stuff. And, I kind of realized once, I was taking this more serious than him, it was safe for me to come back to my studio and just, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So I just did what I could, and now I'm back up here working. So
That's great. I've seen that generational divide. Your generation is in a way gets it better than my generation or your dad's generation seems to. Like
it's,
we'll think we're doing everything okay, and then I remember when I was at a grocery store with my wife Sandy. One of those first days we had like the full-on masks and so on and gloves, and Sandy would take her gloves off to feel the fruit, and I go, okay, you're kind of blowing it.
you're defeating the purpose of the glove.
So, it's kind of that kind of unconscious thing where you think you're being careful.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, I think the funny thing I've noticed, especially in society, is like in the beginning, everyone was like very afraid, and that's when kind of the cases were lower. And now that there's more up there, everyone seems to be eased. It's like this direct inverse correlation of cases and fear. So
I know. Well, it was so great when we did the show at the beginning of the year with you and Greg Miller. Uh,
yeah,
that it was so great to get to meet your dad and talk a little bit about. He was instrumental in a lot of ways with some of the major influences you got to have as a younger person, seeing that this might be a path for you. Talk a
yeah.
little bit about how that evolved.
He, well, it was nice because I have a bit of a kooky family, and I think my mom and my aunt were kind of like younger collectors of a lot of the California contemporary guys' work, and they became friends with them. My aunt specifically, and my dad didn't really know a hell of a lot about art, but he like really saw that I was kind of interested in that, and so he did his best to like support me, and he befriended a lot of these guys, and we ended up like spending a good amount of time with these guys because he bought some of their work, some of the stuff that he understood, and he really liked them, and then I kind of got to tag along and just like be there, like pulling on their coattails, asking them questions and like figuring things out. But yeah, my dad was really instrumental because he kind of just allowed me access to meeting these guys, and that was really
So talk about who some of these guys were that you were getting to know.
like Billy Al Bankston, Peter Alexander, and like Chuck Rinaldi, and then someone else, Jim Corcoran. My dad became friends with Corcoran and figured out that I was interested in art, and kind of asked Jim what would you have your son do if he wanted to kind of pursue this path, because being in the art world, there is no clear trajectory. You're not going to like go to law school, get a job at a law firm. Like it's kind of willy nilly, and you learn in ways that you can. But at that time, there were really no art business programs. It was really kind of just like you learn art history, and then maybe you go to art school kind of type deal. So it was nice, and so all those guys like Billy Al and Peter. I'm probably closest with Billy Al, and then as I got older, I became closer with Peter. They they really liked my dad, and then we got to hang out, and then I got to hang out more with Chuck Arnaldi also, who was just amazing. So it was wonderful, and I feel like I never got my MFA, but getting to hang around those guys just like one on one was better than any kind of education I could have got. So it was fantastic, and it was really formative in like just developing my sensibility and my taste, you know, in art growing up, and that kind of like expanded, you know, from there.
When you were first
It
with
was wonderful
dad,
because, like, you know,
go ahead. When your dad was first starting to collect their work and you were getting to know them, how old were you? Were you?
mm, I was like in my like I mean, I don't even, like, you know, I want to say early teens, but I was like 12, so like 12 teen, maybe even younger. So yeah, so I got to hang around them, and yeah, my aunt started collecting their work earlier, and like she was buying stuff from Corcoran, you know, back in the day, like early Peter resin piece and like this beautiful Chuck, you know, stick piece that she has at her place in Sun Valley. And so everything was like a really, really kind of like unusual, you know, learning about California artists, you know, from my aunt's collection in Sun Valley, Idaho. So kind of like out of, you know, place. And then also, you know, the thing that was interesting is, you know, when I went and finally went to school in New York, um, you know, California art at that time was still relatively like under the radar. And these guys were like the, you know, mega rock stars in my mind. So it was all very interesting. Yeah, that was about that age. But I always like, I don't know, like I always just gravitated towards it. I mean, I remember I saw this really amazing like Billy 1970s Dracula piece at my aunt's house that was like, you know, had these drops on it, and it would just, the Dracula in the middle, like that flower, would just disappear at like all times a day, and then sometimes it would just come on like fire. And it really just kind of baffled me as a kid, like when you're still figuring out, you know, the world around you, to see this thing that is like an inanimate object that keeps kind of moving. And same with Peter's resin stuff. So I just was attracted to it like at a really young age because it confused me and kind of excited me at the same time. So yeah.
I mean, what a great gift to you know, to grow up with those guys as inspirations. And you know, I think one of the things, you may have said it to me, or one of the other artists was, you know, part of what you get from that. Oh, you know who it was? It was Chuck's daughter, Natalie.
Oh yeah.
Talking to her. One of the points she made about just, you know, you grow up surrounded by that, and you start to realize that there are a lot of possible paths for you to go in this lifestyle where you can really explore your passions. And Shingo Francis was also talking about that, growing up with his dad, and just, you know, you see that you don't have, it doesn't have to be about making money and having a traditional kind of career, that your career can be kind of a way of having the focus on finding your voice and finding your relationship to the world, and then expressing that experience and relationship. And you see how each of these guys did that in a way that is really instructive to a great way to lead a life.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, the one thing I mean, there's many things I admire about all those guys, but I think one of the things that always stuck out to me as a kid was the fact that like these guys really only did this because they absolutely loved it. I mean, there was no promise of a career or like, you know, blockbuster kind of, you know, like money or anything like that. I mean, they were in Venice, they were doing this, and they did it because they absolutely loved it. And to me, there's nothing more admirable than doing something just out of like passion and like a calling and a purpose. And then the other thing that I just loved about that work is that they looked at making art in such a non-traditional way by using so many different kinds of materials, whether it was like metal and, you know, car stuff, or like wood with Chuck, or, you know, resin lacquer with you know, Peter and these guys. So that also just kind of expanded the possibilities of what, you know, could be done artistically. And I feel super thankful to those guys because they really just kind of like paved the way here when there was no promise of anything. So yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It is. Well, and that's the thing that I think I find inspiration from all the artists that I am lucky enough to work with, is that you're working with people who have a passion for what they do, and you get up every day with excitement and something's new and so on. It's certainly what I love about the path I've chosen, with that same sort of, tremendous inspiration from being with and part of art.
Yeah.
That show that we did, there's a piece that's over your right shoulder, that
Yes.
circular piece that we showed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, when I first came to your studio, those pieces really caught my eye, and they very much had sort of a next generational fascination with materials and process, and really pushing the possibilities of those materials. How did that process, talk a little bit about that process and how it evolved?
It was kind of, yeah, I mean, like you said, it was kind of, living in that tradition. I think, when I started out all this stuff, talking about those guys again, when they were here, there was no kind of like, or when they started, there was no history of California art, unless you talk about like California plein air. And so for them, they could really like, do whatever they want. But, being this kind of like, fourth, fifth generation California artist, I mean, there's been, several since the 50s. You kind of have to acknowledge and understand, who, you're working in the shadows of, I guess. So I was always really interested in like the kind of light and space and work that always kind of had this like physical quality that was like kind of, like a painting, but kind of a sculpture as well. Play with the light. So you have this kind of like finish fetish as well with like, working with that like California light. But the thing that they always really focused on was kind of this like perfection in that work. Everything everything is just absolutely perfect. Corcoran always says, you can't beat perfection, which is, a good line. And so for me, I wanted to kind of go into that, into that tradition, but I wanted to find a way where it's almost like perfectly imperfect. So by using these, what it is, for people who don't know, it's aluminum that's anodized and layered with car paint, and then I shoot it with a gun and it reveals all the colors. And so what I wanted to do was kind of find a way to like create these like perfectly imperfect objects. So I shoot them and the colors revealed. So it is random, and it doesn't have that like, very perfect, like the Craig Kaufman, like, everything is just like, where it should be. There's kind of this like amazing randomness to it. But then the finished effects, once I, flatten them and polish them and all that, it has all of those kinds of qualities where it does feel like, like a jewel. Like everything, I think a lot of time when you look at California art, like it feels like a gem. Like you're looking at this little, even if it's, this big or, this big. I mean, all of them have this wonderful quality where they feel kind of like a treasure, and that they're like precious. So, so that's what that one is. And that kind of involved, because it was, when I first started doing them, I was shooting a bunch of different, using a bunch of different guns to kind of create these, holes and scrapes and all that kinds of stuff. And, Peter Alexander let me bring some work to the studio, which was super amazing. Peter's health was always, pretty difficult, so he couldn't come downtown. And so he allowed me to bring some stuff in, and we looked at the work and we kind of talked about it. And, the thing I love about those guys is most of the time they don't sugarcoat it. Like they're very straightforward. And so we were looking at one of them, and one of them had like the piercing bullets of like a, handgun, and then the other had like birdshot of the shotgun. And he looked at the birdshot and he's like, now this I really like. It's really interesting. And then he points to the bullet hole. He's like, now this is crap. I don't like this at all. He's like, well, I don't, well, we'll see. Good luck. And he kind of like, brushed me off a little bit. And I was like, all right, well, thanks, Peter. So I did these ones like just with the birdshot. so you kind of have this, he liked the birdshot because it was more mysterious, meaning that like, you can't tell it's a bullet hole. You can't tell that they're using bullets or guns. But then, it was really pretty wonderful and endearing. The last time I saw Peter, he had a show at Parish Hyman, and to everyone who doesn't know, he just passed away about a month ago, which was really sad. But he brought me aside at his own show, and the last thing he said to me, he's like, I think I may have misjudged or judged you too quickly on the holes that you're doing in your work. And he's like, I was thinking of them and I was looking at them again, and I think they're really spectacular. Like, you really need to work and keep doing more of those. And I was like, I was very touched. I was, to bring me aside at this man's show and say that, it meant quite a lot. So anyway, that's the story of those.
Yeah, no, Peter was such a great guy. I got to know him, God, 30 years ago or so. And just, he had a great sense of humor and was very generous with his time and with his opinions. But generous doesn't also, it's, as you said, generous could mean without the sugarcoating. And, but it's refreshing. It's actually a trait that I'm inspired by also. When you talk to someone, it's just so much more efficient to be candid about what you think and where you think someone's work is, and where it could be pushed further, and so on. But yeah, this series I really love, and there is this very somewhat Eastern quality to it, where you have a tension between the random, accidental chance and circumstance of the act, and then it's in tension with and balance with the mastery and intention that you have as an artist. And so that you have those two things kind of finding a balance, and it's kind of a very Zen Eastern notion that I see in a lot of California abstract artists, from that generation we're talking about. Certainly Ed Moses, Sam Francis, Peter, for sure, all had that love of the random, accidental occurrence in balance with an overall idea that had a lot of intention to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's there's this kind of old, I believe it's Japanese philosophy, wabi sabi, that kind of like the imperfection, when you have like scholar stones that you kind of like leave in nature and they get destroyed, but it's, it kind of is like perfectly imperfect. And I think that's kind of an interesting analogy for, just life in general. I mean, it's impossible to, even though, like I said, Corcoran says you can't be perfection. Sometimes, very few things are absolutely perfect. But yeah. You can sure as hell try.
Well, I did a talk with these guys, with Ed Moses, Ed Ruscha, Billy.
Oh yeah, that was great. Yeah, that was wonderful.
Yeah, well, and Ed and Billy got talking about his dentos, which were these pieces with the chevrons on them that were done on metal. And I think one of the early ones had an imperfection to it, and so he kind of went further with that and dented it all up. And so it wasn't this perfectly smooth surface anymore. And that spawned a whole series of his, which he calls the dentos, which is embracing that imperfection of the surface.
Yeah, those are great. It's funny, on some of them, I've only been able to look at a couple, but I feel like, Billy was able to make a dent, whether he got like a metal, BAB or something, and he made dents of his initials as a signature, which is pretty cool, I mean, it's very interesting to see the things that those people were able to accomplish, especially nowadays, what with all the information and the ability to just like, if I need to find out how to get something done or find, someone to work with, I could just look on the internet. I mean, these guys really had to like get out there and like figure out how to do it. And I really admire that. So,
yeah. I'm looking at some other pieces behind you. One of the things that I noticed when I first did a studio visit was you've got quite a range of aesthetic interest and artistic output. That piece with the black and kind of gray that's in the middle, that's a whole series, kind of a reflection series, would you say? Of
Yeah.
they start out as talk about that series a little bit.
Yeah, so what they are is they're double-sided paintings on glass. And I live in downtown, and I have this kind of wonderful corner spot with these like really nice windows. I mean, here I can kind of show you just a little, you kind of see like what they're.
Yeah, very cool.
And so I've always had this like amazing fascination with windows, because I was always, kind of a quiet, introverted kid, and I've loved windows because to me they like represent this ultimate symbol of freedom, meaning that you can like mentally escape out of a window and then also physically escape out of a window, which is kind of interesting, So you could just sit there and stare out a window and you can transport yourself somewhere else. Or if need be, you can break it and just run out. So I don't know. These ones were something that I wanted to do, where I kind of wanted to capture that idea of looking out of a window and creating that kind of depth that you might not be able to get just by, layering paint on canvas. So what they are is they are it's plexiglass, and on the backside I paint the black, so it's like a backwards painting. So you get these like sky, cloud kind of like motif. And then on the front side here, I use a kind of like acrylic gel that you usually mix with, acrylic paint, a really glossy feel. But on its own, it's completely transparent. But what it does is it picks up, light based on like kind of the directions of, the strokes and where you are in the room. So to me, it was really just kind of like the ultimate light and space painting, really.
I love it. From this perspective, the depth on it is amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, I love these. I think they're really fantastic. They're a little bit hard to make because the framing cost me an arm and a leg, and especially when everything's closed down during COVID, you can't really get over to your framer too often. But they're really fun to make, and I started actually printing. I would mix photography and painting also, so I'd take pictures of downtown LA, and I would print buildings or images on the backside, and then I'd paint the sky. So it was this very surreal kind of like, is that the color of the sky? Is that real? But then you see a building, and it's so you assume that it's real. So they're fun. I mean, I want to do more. I think they're really kind of a great series.
Yeah, well, we were tempted to show several of them in that first show we did together, and I'm glad we waited because I want to give them the proper due, and I think that will be a whole other fun aspect to show of your work. Now, and then talk about the cartoon pieces, more figurative out there pieces, which is also you have a lot in your studio.
Kind of see it. So it's this is kind of more or less stuff that I've been doing in COVID, because with everything that's been shut down, for one, it's the thing that's really funny is with the gun stuff, it's hard to get my materials, meaning like go to a gun store, because people have just been flooding gun stores because they think, the world is going to end. So that, and like renting out the range and all kinds of stuff, it's been very difficult. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of find a series that, or something that I could work on in my studio. That's just me and paint and a canvas. And so, part of my, I look at every experience as like kind of a formative experience. But when I moved to LA back from New York, I started working at the Broad, and I was there for 4 years, and I was there every Saturday and every Tuesday, kind of like volunteering and helping out and, teaching kids about art. And the thing that was fascinating was that the majority of the people who came to that museum had never been to a museum in their life. It was a free museum. It's what with the explosion of Instagram and social media, people saw it more as like an amusement park. They're like, where's the big table and chair ride? Like, where's the mirror selfie room ride? Like, what do I do to get in here? And it was really interesting to see the way that people would interact with art, knowing nothing about art, and especially because it's something that I've been studying for a while. And the one thing that was really kind of like the major comment by most people is either like, oh, like, my kid could do that, or pointing to their youngest, child in their party and being like, hey, did you paint that? Kind of like joking, whether it's like Cy Twombly. I mean, even like Warhol, people are like, I could do that. Or when they're looking at Ellsworth Kelly, they're like, oh my God, this thing is so silly. So I kind of always made this connection that and it's just kind of true. A lot of artists have typically always taken this idea of like low art, like little kid art. I mean, whether it's like, John Dufay or, Murakami, like all these people have done something kind of interesting like that. And so I was sitting next to my niece, and she was, painting on her little iPad app. She was trying to color in this Elmo, and she was just going nuts and just like all over the place, like didn't care at all. No preconceived notion of what good art is. She just wanted to put color on this thing like there was no tomorrow. And I kind of had this like aha moment, because it was like very recognizable imagery. I mean, something that we all can be like, oh, it's a little kid, coloring book, whether it's at Denny's or, a long car ride or something. So I kind of started exploring this motif of like making these interesting, childlike like outlines. So I do the outlines in like, it's this black acrylic, and then I use ink as well to make it like really thick. And then I use this like oil stick to color it in. So it's basically, like these big excitable movements, like, that of a kid. So anyways, yeah, that's what those are. I've done a lot of them since I've been in quarantine, because they're really easy to do materials wise, being kind of, trapped inside. So.
Yeah, well, no, they've got a really great energy to them, and it reminds me of the kind of the two aspects of work that, say, Kenny Price had, where he had those really beautiful organic ceramic pieces, and then he had this whole other side to him where he did these, very cartoonish but exquisitely drawn pen and ink and watercolor pieces that were completely different in style and feeling from his ceramic sculptural work, but very much still a part of his desire to express himself, and his humor really came out with those pieces.
No, that's the highest praise anyone could ever give me. Ken Price, I mean, God, if I had all the money in the world, I think I would become a Ken Price hoarder. I'd just sculptures on drawings. I mean, that guy was a freaking genius.
I know.
But yeah, I kind of like in this, it's been to like kind of play with that, like my sense of humor. And then I think also like, during this crazy time, it's been fun just because of, I don't know, it's like childhood stuff and things that are, just happy. It's an easier way to deal with, serious things, I guess you could say. That's what I kind of noticed in this motif of almost, I've been watching like a lot of little kid animation stuff, and you see things that, like a tiger that wants to be your friend, and like, that's not reality. Like a tiger would rip you apart in real life, but it's like, it's almost like cushioning the blow.
Yeah.
It's kind of what I've been trying to do with some of this stuff. And so like this one, it's like, for me, the palm tree motif is like very Californian, whether it's like a silhouette in the sky or something, and to kind of do it on fire, I think California, and Southern California in particular, has this kind of history of things being on fire, whether it's Boucher's, gas stations on fire, or the fires we deal with annually, I mean, it's kind of something we deal with constantly. And yeah, it's kind of crazy. I did this one like right before Memorial Day weekend, and then all that stuff happened, that just, awful incident with George Floyd, and then all these just riots erupted. So I did this right before that, kind of like jokingly, and then afterwards I looked at it far more seriously, obviously. So pretty,
Amazing. Well, proving once again that, artists really are tapped into the pulse of the times. So,
yeah. Well, I'd rather not be. Never know.
Nick, this has been really great. Thank you so much. I can't wait to be able to come down and see in more detail what you're up to and so on. And maybe toward the end of the month, we'll make a plan. I'd love to do that and just check in.
Yeah, I'm here, man. So I'm not going anywhere.
All right. Well, listen, say hi to your dad for me. And it's been great catching up with you. Take care. Stay safe. And let's talk again soon.
Cool. Thanks so much, Bill. Take care.
All right. My pleasure. Take care.